Defending Israel with David Harris on JBS is made possible in part by a generous gift in memory of Eric and Mira J. Spector, the Paul and Lynn Late Family Foundation, To Life, to Love, Barbara and Bob Goodkind, the Patricia Worthen Ullman Foundation.
Hello JBS viewers, I'm David Harris and this is Defending Israel. And I'm very pleased and honored today to introduce you to a special guest. His name is Hussain Abdul-Hussain. He is a research fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies in Washington. His background begins in two Middle Eastern countries, Lebanon and Iraq. But rather than me telling you the story, I'd rather that he tell you the story. Hussain, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Now, for the viewers who may not have seen you on social media, though I read you religiously, could you share a little bit about your own background? It's quite an interesting background and very relevant to our discussion, of course. Where did it begin?
Yeah, absolutely. Dad is Iraqi, mom is Lebanese, and I grew up in these two countries until I was 8 or 9 when we couldn't go to Iraq anymore. Dad had to serve in the military in the war against Iran at the time. And we stayed in Lebanon. I went to college there. My first job as a journalist was in Lebanon. I studied history and archaeology at the American University of Beirut. And then when the Iraq war started, I was one of the biggest supporters of democracy, and this led me to Washington 20 years ago. And I've been defending democracy and spreading democracy ever since.
So as a defender of democracy, maybe we begin with that question. What's your democracy index for the Middle East, the region that you watch so closely for the FDD, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies? Where do we stand and what are the trend lines?
Well, it's unfortunate that if you look at all these countries in the region that we call the Middle East, the only liberal democracy would be Israel. The other countries, I was heavily invested intellectually and emotionally in spreading democracy, whether in Iraq in 2003, Lebanon 2005, then starting 2011, what came to be called as the Arab Spring in Egypt and Libya and Syria and Yemen. So I learned a few lessons. And the main lesson is that you cannot spread democracy before you cultivate liberty. That is, before the social structure understands liberty and practices it, there's no room for democracy. Democracy will always be just an exercise of going to the polls and electing the same people over and over again. So I never lose hope. I think this will come, maybe not in our lifetimes, but people should keep on hoping and pushing for democracy. And until this happens, we have to deal with what we have. So clearly a country like Iraq and Lebanon and Syria are failing states when compared to other non-democracies such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Bahrain. So until we get to democracy, I think, we have to pick and choose between what we have. And, the UAE has become the mecca of that part of the world. I mean, all these cousins and friends and family, people I grew up with who did not end up moving to the US or Europe, they're all now in the Gulf, in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, working, making money, raising children and families. So there are always shades of gray. I want democracy to spread, but until then, we have to deal with what we have. And along these lines, I think Israel is a huge asset. I think, the Arabs should live in peace with Israel, and peace should be peace for peace, not peace for land or, whatever other arrangement. And once that happens, I think there'll be the Arab side will benefit enormously from the knowledge that they can exchange with Israel, from the trade, from the tourism, from you name it. I think there's no reason why we should continue to live the way we're living. That unless we get this piece of land or that piece of real estate, I'll keep on killing you, and you keep on killing me back.
Hussain, I obviously want to come to Israel and hear more about your views, but may I stick with democracy for a moment? Because the earlier American administrations, I'm thinking of the Bush administration in particular, thought that they could somehow introduce democracy from the outside. And I think by all judgments, it largely failed. In your estimation, what will it take to create the fertile soil to bring the kind of democracy that you're talking about, that we understand in the West, to this part of the world?
Well, David, it's unfortunate that when we assess the Iraq War, and we rarely do that in this country, but when we assess it, we draw 2 points and a linear line between them. So we say there was Saddam and stability in Iraq, and then America went in, and then there was violence, and violence has persisted since. I disagree with this simplistic view of Iraq. I think before he left office, President Bush did an amazing piece of foreign policy, the surge of troops, the alliance with the Sunni tribes. When the U.S. troops left Iraq under President Obama by the end of 2011, violence in Iraq had went down to pre-2003 levels. I don't think many people know that or understand why this was important. So Bush handed over an Iraq that was relatively okay, that was on the right path. But I think President Obama didn't understand what it took or what he had at the time. And the biggest mistake was that after President Obama came to power and Iraq held election, a secular Shia Sunni ticket won the biggest bloc in parliament by 2 seats. And instead of letting these guys govern Iraq, and maybe because Washington was trying to curry favor with Iran, we let the losers. So we passed over the winner, Ayad Alawi, and we let the loser, Nouri al-Maliki, become prime minister and form the cabinet. And that was, number one, we undermined Iraqi democracy that we had gone in to spread. And number two, we gifted Iraq to Iran. And the rest, as they say, is history. So I can point out several turns, whether in Iraq or Lebanon or anywhere else, where we committed a huge error. And we ended up gifting these countries to autocrats like Iran instead of just, being a bit more patient. And, I think patience is key. And it's unfortunate that, in Western politics and in America in particular, patience is not a thing. We go by a news cycle and we get bored of things, and we don't really persist until we achieve things.
Hussain, in the West, again, not to simplify long history, but one of the elements required for democracy as we know it was the separation of church and state. Do you think it's possible in the Middle East, the region you know so well, to really talk about democracy, true democracy, without addressing the question of the relationship between religion and state? Or can they somehow be managed compatibly?
So my understanding is that West and in Europe during the Industrial Revolution, the reason this happened is because capitalism pushed toward meritocracy. And this allowed individuals to part ways with the tribe and with the feudal lords and become individuals on their own. And then they started thinking on their own, and they started forming their opinion and picking and choosing which church and which religion, and maybe being theist versus being non-theist. In the Middle East, we haven't had this capitalism that pushed people toward or governments toward meritocracy. What we have is an enormous amount of money that comes through the chief and filters down. And then whatever the chief says, everybody else has to fall in line. Now, in the Middle East, I don't think we can construct any modern state, democracy or not, as long as Islam is not a religion. I think Islam is a religion like all other religions. It is what you make of it, out of it. My mother is a conservative Muslim who wears a hijab, and she doesn't think that Islam should be part of government, or that we should get our instructions from scripts written in the 7th century or 8th century about how we should live our daily life, or have our economy, or have the way we treat others. So what I'm trying to say here is that Islam should become a religion like Christianity and Judaism, and it should get out of public life. Now, the problem is that it's not out of the public life. Political Islam is very widespread and strong, and it has regimes such as the Iran regime. And this is Islamism, and I try to correct this on social media and otherwise whenever I get the chance to. There's a huge difference between Islamic and Islamist. Islamic is someone who practices Islam as a religion in their own space at their own time. Islamism is when you try to make the public space in the image of Islam, and this is bad. This is bad for Arab countries, predominantly Muslim countries, and this is bad for the Muslim communities who are moving to Europe, because now we look at the public space in Europe and you see all these Shia trying to commemorate Ashura, or all kinds of stuff, and it is not good that these immigrants do not understand that they are here as individual citizens, not as a collective called Islam. I mean, this is something that's bad on both sides, and in the West and in the East.
Very important. Thank you for that. I'm curious, as someone who grew up both in Iraq and Lebanon, was educated there, your first jobs were there, you said, as a journalist. To what degree, if at all, was anti-Semitism part of your upbringing?
Well, to be honest, I mean, in Iraq, we were busy cursing Khomeini and the Iranians, and the whole thing, Israel and the Palestinians, rarely came up. And the first time I came into, I was introduced to the whole concept of Israel was when we moved to Lebanon. And at the time, Israel had just invaded in 1982 to eject the Arafat and the PL out of Lebanon. So in Iraq was to an extent secular and, busy doing its own thing. Now, things have changed since then. My exposure to Jews has been within the confines of Islam, the religion, not Islamism, the political ideology. So within religion, if you read the Quran, you can find a dozen or more verses where they say these are people of the book. We like them. They're just like us. The Jews are going to heaven. We're going to heaven with them. There are verses that really value these religions that they call the Abrahamic religions. But if you go to the political Islamism, the ideology, then they revive all these verses that call for war and killing, and this is where anti-Semitism becomes really an issue. So we go back to the differentiation between the two. If you grow up as an average Muslim, I think you'll be fine with Christians and Jews. If you grow up, under the Islamist regime of Iran, or supporting any other Islamist organization in Egypt or Iraq or anywhere else, then your view of Jews, looking from Islamism, will be really bad. Now, thankfully, my family was conservative. None of them was Islamist. None of them is Islamist right now. And I'd say, the Islamists, I wouldn't say that they're the majority. I think at best they probably make up to 1/3 of the population, even less. So I understood at an early age that this Islamist antagonism toward Judaism is politics. It's not religion.
Very interesting. And now let's come back to Israel, because you said at the outset, unprompted, that the one liberal democracy in the region is Israel. I assume you did not learn about that in Iraqi or Lebanese schools. You learned it elsewhere. How did you come to understand Israel at this level?
Well, it's a long trip. So even though I was lucky to go to the American University of Beirut, where I had access and exposure to the best human thought, the best thought that the humanity could offer, European Enlightenment, Hobbes and Locke, and you name it. It was a process. It took time to understand. Mind you, that if you grow up in Lebanon, if you live in Lebanon, literature about Israel is very controlled. So you only get either self-hating Jews or bogus documents like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, or all these sham documents. And so living in Lebanon does not allow you access to understand what Israel is. Now, I was fortunate that I came here. I had access to more literature. And now, when I read, even in this country, you can pick any, sometimes professors, people who are smart and who know, and who are bashing Israel. And how do they substantiate their claims? They usually use, stuff from Israeli organizations. I mean, they cite Israeli organizations. I'm thinking, you really think it's, this illiberal country allows these organizations to write all these documents against the country itself? So it doesn't take long for someone to understand that you can stand in the middle of Jerusalem and bash Israel all you want, the government and the policy. Now, people don't draw a line between opposing the government of Israel and opposing the existence of the state of Israel. So the first is fine. I mean, you can oppose whatever policy of whatever government. But the thing with Israel is that everyone feels easy when they just bash the existence, that this country should not exist. And, and that's that. So when you get exposure to this debate, you start realizing that, listen, you guys, I mean, there's a debate inside of Israel. There's, debate between Israelis overseas. I think Israel is the most debated country in the world. Its system, its ideology, its history, its thinking, everything. This is not something that looks like illiberal to me. I mean, I grew up under Saddam. You know what how censorship looks like. Our favorite motto at the time was that walls have ears. While growing up in Iraq, I mean, my parents controlled their emotions when I was a kid, so that they wouldn't want to convey anything that I might take with me to school, and that'll backfire and put them in prison. So this is illiberal. But I mean, give me a break. You live in Israel. You're an Arab Israeli student, and you go and you hold a protest for Israel at Tel Aviv University, and you think this is an illiberal democracy? I mean, it's ironic to me.
So, Hussain, as you and I speak, the Prime Minister of Israel is in Washington, where you work. If you had a few minutes with the Prime Minister alone, can you give us a sense of what are the themes you would want to raise with him? What are the questions you would want to ask of him? What's the information you would want to impart to him, given your own unique understanding of the region?
I follow on the Israeli debate often, and that's because it fascinates me. I mean, many Israelis have a debate that I envy, that I wish Arab countries could have a similar debate. One of my favorite Israeli intellectuals is Micha Goodman, who's the author of Catch 67. In one of his recent appearances after October 7, he was arguing over whether Israel should remain the liberal democracy that it is, or it should behave like everybody else, because Israel is clearly living in a jungle. And the Israeli metaphor for this is that Israel is this beautiful mansion, but in the middle of a jungle. So you can live as a refined person, but then you have to fight like you're in a forest or a jungle. So Goodman thinks that the source of power of Israel is its liberal democracy. And I think this applies to us here in the U.S. and to the Western Bloc. And to me, this is the challenge that most. I mean, I'm not scared of Gaza or Hamas or the PA or the U.S. universities. What scares me the most is how to maintain the liberal democracy the marvelous liberal democracy that Israel has and that America has. And if I get any number of minutes or hours with Prime Minister of Israel, whether it's Bibi Netanyahu or any other prime minister, that would be something that I'd want to raise with them. That that are you sure that nothing that you're doing is hurting the democracy? Are you sure that the democracy is robust and liberal as we want it to be? This is the difference between democracies, the West and the rest of the world, or between Israel and its neighbors. So that would be what's on my mind. I'm sure he has so many issues on his mind, but that's something else.
One or two. Thank you. So let me take the same question, but replace the Prime Minister of Israel with the President of the United States, because again, following you on social media, you have lots of thoughts about what American policy ought to look like, not just vis-a-vis Israel, but the larger region, including, of course, Iran and its tentacles. So could you share with us what would you want to raise with the President of the United States?
That's a great question. Number one, consistency. We have to be consistent with steady hands. We have to be consistent in supporting our allies and consistent in standing up to our enemies. And this means that it doesn't matter who's in power in Israel, whether it's Bibi Netanyahu, Yair Lapid, or any other person. Our relationship with Israel is country to country, ally to ally. And we do not give them any support or sell them any arms and then dictate to them what they should do. That's not how alliances work. There are no two allies where one ally dictates what the other ally does. And this applies to our relationship with the Gulf, with Saudi Arabia, with the UAE, with everybody else. At the same time, this is how we should deal with Iran. We don't care whether there's a reformist president or a conservative president. We judge Iran on its action, and its action has been so far deception, killing, undermining other governments, sponsoring terrorism. So we have to stand up to Iran, and we've had so many experiments of trying to make nice with Iran. By the way, this started way before Barack Obama. So under President Reagan, National Security Advisor Bud McFarlane landed in Tehran. They thought at the time that they could win over Khomeini away from the Soviets. We failed at the time. We failed under Obama. I think we will fail going forward. We need a strategy wherein we tell our friends that you are our friends, the other guys are our enemies. And, over time and with patience, we and our allies will prevail our enemies over our enemies. So, we have to have clarity over this. We can't just change whenever, if there's a protest, a rally in Michigan or something else in New York, and then all of a sudden we change our foreign policy. We have to be consistent on foreign policy.
Hussain, today, do you believe that Iran fears the United States or not?
Well, I mean, it's unfortunate that I have to say this, and I'm nonpartisan, and I just said that relations shouldn't depend on who's in office, but Iran fears the U.S. when a Republican president is in office, is in the White House, and they don't fear us when there's a Democrat. And this, my observation is just Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden, and you can see that when President Trump took out Soleimani, they just acted as if they were dead for the coming 2 years. So no harassment, no enrichment, no wars. But then when they understood that, that the day that President Biden was elected and they understood that now things have become relaxed, enrichment, 2 or 3 wars started since then, ballistic missiles, you name it. So the way they operate is not the way that we like them to operate. They operate based on force, they're taking the measurements of the US president, whoever he is. They keep on pushing, and once we push back, they stop. Now, President Biden did a great thing in Iraq. We asked Iran to rein in its militias after October 7. The militias continued to throw missiles on our troops, killing 3 of them in Jordan. And after that, we took out the top commander of Kata'ib Hezbollah, which is a pro-Iran militia. And they stopped. And this shows that these guys this is how they operate. You draw the line using your muscle, and they stop.
So we only have a few minutes left, and I've got 1,000 questions, so I'm not sure what to do. But post-October 7th, are you, Hussain, more or less optimistic about the prospects of not just preserving the Abraham Accords, but widening and deepening them or not? And obviously the big question is Saudi Arabia.
I'm more optimistic, and I think the elimination of Hamas takes out a huge obstacle toward expanding Abraham Accords, toward Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords, and toward Palestinians themselves joining Abraham Accords and looking for their standards of living instead of continue to live in this, a mishmash of ideology that's both Islamist and Arabist and whatnot. So I think if this war goes all the way to taking out Hamas the organization, of course not the idea, I think normalization would be a much better place, and it will resume once the shooting stops.
So that's an optimistic note on Saudi Arabia. Is it also, you began to say it, is it an optimistic note about the Palestinians themselves? Or would that be a step too far in your estimation?
Well, if they go under the guidance of the Saudis and the Emiratis, I think they'll get to places. Now, mind you, the reason that the Emiratis did this, and now that the Saudis are trying to follow in their footsteps, is self-interest. They think that peace is good for the economy, for growing it, for bilateral trade with Israel, you name it. So they're doing this for their own interest. And I wish that the Palestinians understand that peace today, immediate, unconditional, is by far in their interest than anything they would get otherwise, whether it's 2 states or 5 states or 10 states. So this is something that and of course this applies to the Lebanese too. I keep on telling my friends and family over there all the time, immediate peace between Lebanon and Israel is a pure Lebanese gain. But like I said, it takes time. These things, it's a culture. You have to spread liberty. You have to make these people connect between their interests and who they vote for, not between who they vote for and their emotions.
So there are those who, in Brussels, Joseph Borrell, the EU foreign minister, some in Washington, who say this is exactly the right time to pursue a 2-state agreement with the Palestinians. Do you agree or disagree?
Well, yeah, even if we try to play along, where's the other state? Now, the thing is, 2 states here relies on the assumption that the second state will be made and manufactured and built by Israel itself. There's no thinking that who are the Palestinians who will be building this state? Hamas, the corrupt PA. We tried this, and these guys have not produced one single functioning organization, let alone a whole state. So I wish, there was someone who could do the work, but there's none. And as long as there's none, and I'm sure the Israelis would love to have a partner, as long as there's none, this is what we have. So maybe if we get the moderate and level-headed Arabs to get involved, maybe then they can do a better job and, raise the living standards of Palestinians.
As you would say, inshallah. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I have not run out of questions, but time we have run out of. Hussain Abdul-Hussain, I cannot thank you enough for joining us on the show, for sharing your insights, and most of all, for offering hope to many of us that there are Arab voices who visualize a brighter future for the Middle East that includes, not excludes, but includes Israel. So thank you for everything. JBS viewers, I hope you've enjoyed and learned from this opportunity to speak with Hussain Abdul-Hussain. I look forward to seeing you on future shows. Thank you for joining us today.